On this second Sunday of Advent, our theme is love, and we're going to be looking at one of the classic Advent passages from Isaiah chapter 40, looking at verses 1 to 11. And I've entitled my talk for today, Encountering Love in the Wilderness. The first fall that we lived up in Flin Flon, our good friend Ingy invited me on an adventure to his trapline cabin. For a prairie boy like me, lifting off through the September morning mist on the lake in front of Ingy's home in his trusty float plane to rise above the lakes and trees of wilderness was truly a great adventure. As we flew northward, Ingy regularly pointed out eagles which majestically soared on the air currents about us. After 45 minutes in the air, Ingy set his plane down on a picturesque little lake and we taxied up to a dock that sat just below a classic-looking log cabin. Significantly, for the last 30 minutes of flight, I had noticed no sign of human activity on the terrain beneath us. We spent the day adventuring along trails by foot and along streams by boat. But whenever we were in view, I found myself glancing toward the small float plane and finding comfort that it was still tied up to the dock. That evening, as we sat around a campfire, Ingy asked me a penetrating question. When was the last time I had been in a place where I could be certain no one would happen to come by? After some thoughtful reflection, I was forced to respond that never before. Wherever I had previously been, my journey had included public roads, and if I were able to arrive, others would be able to as well. Then I understood why I felt comfort in checking on Ingy's airplane. That airplane was the only connection to my familiar world. There was probably no other human being within 40 miles, and besides, travel along the ground would have been nearly impossible. The air contained zero sound of anything man-made. There was no hum of traffic coming from some distant road, no buzz of another boat motor, nor had any other aircraft been visible all day. We were alone in the wilderness, and that aloneness created a sense of discomfort. Were it not for Ingy's reassuring presence and the hope of a plane ride back to civilization, I could feel the threat of panic rising up within me. It takes a special breed, to which I'm pretty sure I don't belong, to feel comfortable in the wilderness. The wilderness is a recurring theme in the scriptures. Important people in the Bible, like Moses and Jesus, gained some of their most formative preparation in the wilderness. Significantly for Advent, John the Baptist appeared to prefer the wilderness to living among people, and he came to symbolize the fulfillment of the prophet Isaiah's famous declaration. I will send my messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way. A voice of one calling in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord, make straight paths for him. And that's from John's Gospel, chapter 1. The wilderness awakens people. It not only awakened John, it awakened the people who came to hear him. John's gospel tells us that the people from Judea and even from the city of Jerusalem came to hear him. John's gospel tells us that they came to the wilderness to confess their sins and to be baptized. It makes me wonder, did the people from the cosmopolitan city of Jerusalem experience some of the uncomfortable vulnerability as they visited John in the wilderness that I felt on my adventure with Ingi? On this second Sunday of Advent, we look once again at some familiar words from the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah 40 is a favorite who all feel that unwanted sense of discomfort. And so here are the words from Isaiah 40, 1 to 11. Comfort. Comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed, that her sin has been paid for, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. A voice of one calling, in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be raised up, every mountain and hill made low. The rough ground shall become level, the rugged places a plain, and the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all people will see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. A voice says, cry out, and I said, what shall I cry? All people are like grass, and all their faithfulness is like the flowers of the field. The grass withers and the flowers fall because the breath of the Lord blows on them. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers and the flowers fall, but the word of our God endures forever. You who bring good news to Zion, go up on a high mountain. You who bring good news to Jerusalem, lift up your voice with a shout. Lift it up and do not be afraid. Say to the towns of Judah, here is your God. See, the sovereign Lord comes with power, and he rules with a mighty arm. See, his reward is with him, and his recompense accompanies him. He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young. Isaiah 40 begins with the offer of comfort and ends with the promise that those who hope in the Lord will soar on wings like eagles. Today's reading doesn't include the whole chapter with its ending reference to eagles, but it's helpful to keep it in mind as part of the comfort theme. An important element of comfort within the wilderness is knowing that we are not stuck, that we are able to soar above it, maybe even out of it. What is it about the wilderness that creates our sense of discomfort, which in turn longs for comfort? Quite simply, the wilderness has the capacity to overwhelm us. Entering the wilderness requires preparation. People who enter the wilderness without adequate preparation risk perishing. The wilderness does not allow for trips to Canadian Tire or to the supermarket to pick up those items we neglected to bring. Preparation for the wilderness doesn't only consist in bringing the right stuff, but also includes the accumulation of the necessary knowledge to be there. My wilderness adventure with Ingi highlighted two intense reactions in me. One, I didn't want to be in the wilderness without a guarantee that I could leave. Hence, my frequent glances at the float plane. Two, I wasn't about to get out of sight of my friend Ingi, whom I trusted in having the required knowledge to be where we were. Relatively few people choose to enter a physical wilderness. The only reason Moses ended up in the wilderness was because he was fleeing from a death sentence. In John the Baptist's day, people thought he was strange for living in the wilderness. I personally prefer to stay within sight of a road. And I have a hard time identifying with another friend, Dave, who spent summer canoeing in Nunavut. But that doesn't mean we don't have our own wilderness experiences. The wilderness is wherever we come face to face with our smallness. The wilderness is wherever we encounter our incapacity to deal with the needs we encounter. Or as Isaiah described it, surely the people are grass. The grass withers and the flowers fall. That's us. The onset of a physical debilitation can be a wilderness experience. Activities that once were effortless become difficult and even impossible. Aging can be a wilderness. After a life of independence, we feel ill-equipped to depending on others. Financial failure can be a wilderness. Shame keeps us from acknowledging our need for help. Relational failure can be a wilderness. Loneliness is most intense when others appear relationally secure. Whatever our personal wilderness, pathways that once felt clearly defined vanish as if covered by desert sand. The wilderness, on the other hand, is the refuge of our old enemy, fear. Panic looms over us in the wilderness, threatening to cause us to make potentially fatal errors. No wonder we feel lost within those unexpected wildernesses of life, because we're not prepared, and we're afraid we lack the knowledge to survive. As intimidating as the wilderness can appear, we are surprised to discover that we're more likely to encounter God within the wilderness rather than within the civilized world where everything feels comfortable. Until we know how small we are, we can never really appreciate our need for the ultimate comforter. Because the wilderness exposes our incapacity to handle life's challenges, God has opportunity to come to us and offer to be the pilot who transports us, to be the guide who has the supplies we need, and to be the one with the required knowledge to enable us to survive. Someone like John the Baptist might even question whether we can truly connect with God without having experienced the wilderness. Ultimately, it's in the wilderness where God is able to bless us with love. As Isaiah so expressively wrote, he tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young. One of the questions we face in Advent is, will we be patient to wait for God's coming? We are inclined to get discouraged and impatient for God's arrival in our personal wilderness. But if we commit ourselves to waiting within the wilderness of uncertainty, we prepare ourselves to receive the promise of Advent, to know the reality that God comes to us. And when we experience the reality of God's coming, of God's advent, we will not doubt that God loves us.